Do you want to work until the day you die? Do you want to be forced to spend the rest of your life with only the weekend to look forward to, constantly chasing money, constantly worried about your car breaking down? If we want to avoid this future, then we must act right now. You must invest today or you will work forever. In today's video, I will be breaking down how compound interest works and how you can use it today to prevent your future self from suffering. Albert Einstein said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. And he was right. And it isn't a wonder because it is so hard to understand, but rather that so little people do understand it. Einstein has also said, he who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. So how can you and I use compound interest to escape the rat race of life? First, we need to understand how compound interest works. I am going to give a very simple and quick example. Imagine if you had $100 that gained 10%, it would become $110. That is basic math most of us know about. However, if we add 10% again, it becomes $121. So the second time around, you earned $11 rather than $10. And then if we added 10%, again, you would be $133.10, which is an extra $12.10. This is the basics of compounding. Now, we will go over how we can use compounding interest in our life and why we must start today in order to achieve financial freedom. There are many ways we can get compounded interest that you can research, but the two main ways are through, one, a high yield savings account, and two, stocks. So let's break down how both of these work. With a high yield savings account, you can keep your money in it the same way a traditional saving account works. However, you are guaranteed that you will be paid a certain percent of your money in that account. Most of these offer 2 to 5% returns. So for example, let's say you have $10,000 in a regular savings account. Now, most banks do actually pay you a percent every year. However, it is extremely low, usually less than 0.5% of your money. So if you kept that $10,000 in your savings at the end of the year, it would become $10,050, which isn't bad. But if you had your money in a high yield savings account that earned 4% a year, it would be $10,400. That's 8 times higher than you're getting paid to keep your money in the account. So to put it in perspective, let's say you had a $10,000 emergency fund that sat for 10 years in both accounts. The regular savings account after 10 years would become $10,511.40. So an increase of $511. However, the high yield savings account after 10 years would be $14,802.44. That's an increase of $4,802. So the regular savings account saw an increase of $511, and the high yield savings saw an increase of $4,802. Now, in both instances, you aren't adding any money into the account whatsoever. It is just using the power of interest to grow. Now, that's just in the area of saving, however. That's not even considered investing, technically. So let's get into the second compound grower, stocks. I prefer to follow the S&P 500. That is how people track the market. Why try to beat the standard? Now, the S&P 500 has historically seen returns from between roughly 8 to 10% a year on average. Some years it's up 18%. Some years it's up 2%. But on average, it is up 8 to 10% a year. So we will use a conservative 8% to measure with. The reason compound interest works so well is the longer the money sits, the more it grows. We talked about this in the beginning, how 100 went up by 10, then 11, then 12, and so on. This is why it is vital to begin investing today. Let me give you two examples. We have Guy 1 and Guy 2. Guy 1 is a 40-year-old man who has decently established himself and wishes to retire at 60. Guy 2 is a 20-year-old with just a little to work with, but knows he wants to have a nice amount saved for retirement at age 60 without stretching himself too thin. Guy 1 begins investing $1,000 a month into the S&P 500, and he does so diligently for the next 20 years. Guy 2 invests only $500 a month into the S&P 500, and he sticks to it faithfully for 40 years. So at the end, both guys are 60, and both guys actually invested the same exact amount of money into the market, $240,000 to be exact. However, they didn't both start at the same time. So Guy 1, after setting aside $1,000 a month into investments, turned his $240,000 into $572,000. That's a decent amount, but it might be a little tight to retire with. Now, guy 2, who started at 20 years old with $500 a month, turned his $240,000 into over $1,620,000. This is the power of compound interest. So if you want to escape the rat race or the 9-to-5 life, you must begin investing, and you must begin now. The only reason anyone shouldn't be investing money is if you have any debt with over a 8% APY. So things like credit cards or high interest debt should be paid first, because the same method I just showed you to build wealth is what those people are doing to you to take yours. Back to what Einstein said, he who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. But if you do not have any high interest, you must invest now. Stop waiting and take control of your future.